No, we're all good. So, ladies and gentlemen, in order to provide you with an introduction to our fabulous speaker today, I'm actually going to get Kevin Hart to talk about the speaker, who is Nigel, because Kevin is the man behind Inspirational, and there's no one better to give that introduction than him. So, Kev, over to yourself.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming along again for those of you that came to our December Leadership Summit, and welcome to those that are new to this. What we decided to do after last December's summit, we had some fantastic feedback from it. So this year we're running a 45-minute chat at the end of every month on a different subject that we went through in the summit. Sustainability next month, I think it is, followed by Carolyn in March on well-being. So keep an eye out for those as we go through the year. Now we're kicking off with Nigel because we thought we should, and those of you who know Nigel will know exactly why we're kicking off with Nigel. I met Nigel probably about 15 years ago, I think, and to me he's one of the most straight talking, forward thinking, and I'll call him a guru. I've called him a lot of things, but I think guru is fair to say in the leadership world. I've heard a lot of speakers, seen a lot of speakers, but Nigel stands out. And to me, it's about his irreverence, almost challenging the status quo. Certainly not irrelevant, but certainly irreverent. And enjoy the next sort of 40 minutes or so with Nigel Girling.
Follow that, eh? Okay, I'll share my screen. Assume that I'm allowed to do so. Yeah. So if you let me know when you can see the slides.
Yep, we can see them, Nigel. Thanks.
All good, Nigel.
Excellent news. I want you to see them because it took me ages to find that picture. I really liked it. Okay, afternoon, everybody. Yeah, we're going to have a hopefully irreverent look through some various issues about leadership, but particularly about the idea of how we rise up again after the vaccine has taken effect. Because clearly at some point, and probably this year, we're going to reach a stage where some things can shift. They won't go back to where they were before. I don't think anybody should be expecting a reset button because there won't be one, but there will be different, a new different. So I'm Nigel, for those that don't know me, and if you don't, frankly, Rosie Dean. So we're going to be looking at what happens next. So I'm going to look through a number of things around that, but broadly my kind of heading for this is this one. I don't know, those of you that know Peter Drucker, and if you don't, you really should. Probably the greatest leadership thinker of the last ever, actually 100 years plus. He said something that actually Kevin has used on our website. And I think it's particularly relevant right now with what we're about to talk about today. A lot of what I hear at the moment is people who are trying to deal with the fallout of COVID and the situation of COVID. COVID actually isn't the biggest issue we're going to be facing this year. The big issue we're going to be facing is whether we can change, whether we can shift, whether we can go through a paradigm shift into a different way of being. Because the biggest danger of all is that we try and behave as if it's still 2019. It's not, and it will never be. So that's my backdrop for a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and everything I'm going to cover will be something that hangs off the bottom of this idea that we cannot act with yesterday's logic. We have to think again. A few things I just want to bring out now. I don't think anyone's under any illusion here, although some still may be. It's very easy for people to have wishful thinking in this space, but recovery will take a very long time, potentially 5 or more years before we get back to a state that we would see as normal, what we think of as normal. It'll be a different normal. The vaccine isn't a magic bullet, and neither will be any government intervention that attempts to rejuvenate the economy. This is about intelligent, sustained effort. And I choose my words carefully always, except the swear words, not so much there, but intelligent, sustained effort is critical. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So it's going to be well thought through. It's got to have the ability to continue and to be supported continuously and pushed and reaffirmed and reinforced. But it needs all your stakeholders to be part of this thinking. Organizations, in my experience, have a tendency to favor one or two stakeholder groups over all the others. So if they're a commercial business, it's often shareholders or the city or investors. If they're in the some kind of regulated market, it's often the regulator that is their primary stakeholder. Ask anyone who's a leader in a school, and Ofsted looms large over their thinking and planning and decision making. The point here is that we've got to take all of our stakeholders with us. We've got to think about it from all their points of view and get all of their buy-in and input, and to help so they can help us shape our thinking. I'm going to use the word integration almost as many times as people have used unprecedented over the last 10 months, because integration is the critical word for everything we will ever talk about, actually. It's what Inspiration All was created for, to drive integration. Integration is something that's an easy word to say, but very, very few organizations naturally do it. It's not in our nature, and it's not in our model. Lots of P's here for all of this. So there are a lot of things about our purpose that need to be redefined. We need to think through what we're there for, and we need to think through what our people can do about all of that. We're heading into a blended world where some people will be in a workplace, a lot of people probably be working at home. People won't be able to travel, people won't be able to meet in the traditional way. There's a lot of changes to the way people behave and operate that we've got to think about. We've got to think it through deeply. It's not enough to just say, you know, we'll get everybody on Zoom. So there's a lot of things to think about here. Along with the word integration, I'm going to use quite often the word realignment, because it is realignment. We need to rethink a lot of what we do and how we do it. Intelligent collaboration is going to be a key part of all of this. It's not something that most organizations do naturally. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a minute. So, you'll have heard people talk over the years about the idea of blue sky thinking. Well, the sky's not very blue at the moment. This is cloudy sky thinking. This is a different sort of thinking. We've got to think here about stormy weather and about constant changes in wind direction and weather patterns, because that's what we're going to be facing. It's a different kind of thinking. And it's not about a to-do list. It's not about actions, at first, at least. It's not about actions. It's about thinking about who we're going to be. What sort of organization are we going to have to be in this new world? For example, lots of organizations that thought they were retailers and had shops and footfall. That's not the kind of organization they're going to be anymore. They're going to be a different sort now. They're a supply chain. You know, there's a whole difference in the way that affects your thinking, infrastructure, the jobs you have, the skills people need, all kinds of things. So people need to be thinking now about what is it that they're going to become? And then how will you therefore need to operate to be that thing? It's got to be that way round. If you start triggering actions, there'll often be actions that are the old logic, yeah, the historical version of things. As a nation in the UK, we've always, and I think there's many other nations are the same with this, we've always really valued experience and track record. When you're in a very, very shifting environment, both of those really go in the bin. The fact that you've got a lot of experience of a world that no longer exists is not all that helpful. It might even be a hindrance. The fact that somebody's had a really good track record in the old world is no guarantee or predictor of what they're going to be like now. So we need to think again. This is about a new way of being, a new way of operating. That's particularly true for leaders. A lot of leaders in organizations that I've worked with for 1,000 years see themselves as being in charge of something. You can draw a ring around it. It's a department or a function or a discipline or a skill set that they're in charge of. And that's not really how things should have worked for a very long time. It's certainly not how they're going to work now. You've got to think about, therefore, what is it that you're there to do? If you're not going to be in a corner office in charge of some stuff, what are you going to be? How are you going to lead? There's a lot of meat in this stuff, and I don't wish to kind of over elaborate some of these things, because they're things that my colleagues in Inspirational will build on in future months sessions. So I'm really trying to lay out the ground here. So that's my first thing. This is cloudy sky thinking. We've got to think about what we're planning to become and how, therefore, if that's what we're going to become, do we need to be and operate? So here's the thing. The trouble with this integration business is organizations are generally a bit shit at it. It's not the way we do things. The whole business model in the West in particular has been built around silos. That's how we do things. You can blame Frederick Winslow Taylor, if you like, for the whole idea of scientific management. But if he was around now, it wouldn't be what he was saying now. It made sense then. So we're not typically very good or very well skilled or experienced at thinking in an integrated way. We like chunks. So what we've done over the last 100 years, really, and certainly the last 30 or 50, is we've created lots of tribes. We've created specialisms. I can remember, because of my age, a time when we didn't have anything that dealt with people. Then we had personnel departments, which were predominantly administrative. And then they became human resources departments that got paid more and got in the way a lot more, he says as a CEO. But now, even the idea of human resources is divided into a number of specialist silos. So you've got people who are learning and development people, you've got people who are workforce development people, or organizational development people, or leadership development people. We keep doing this. We keep specializing, drilling things down to more and more specialized skill sets. And it's a human nature that those people will see themselves as different. So we keep creating lots and lots of pockets of difference. That's helpful in some ways. You know, what Taylor's view of that was it made things more efficient because the people became more skilled and therefore did things more quickly. The trouble is that it also creates divides and tribal warfare and a lack of integration because people don't talk to each other and they don't work together. It removes any possibility for collaboration. And collaboration, intelligent collaboration, is one of the things we're going to need the most over the next 5 years. So it's not in our nature generally to do this. Some organizations are quite good at it because they've learned to be. I don't think any of them are good at it automatically. We also love badges. You know, we've been devising things like the old BS 5750 and then ISO 9000 and investors in people and investors in people's got different badges now. So you can be a bronze one or a silver one or a gold one or a diamond studded one or whatever. We've got ISO 14000, you know, we've all these different badges and projects and we dish them out. You know, we dish them out to people and usually we dish them out to a single group to oversee and run. And sometimes we even attach things like an incentive to it. So I've spoken to many HR directors who are on some kind of a bonus for getting their organization up to investors in people gold. Of itself, that creates a problem because it means that one group has a vested interest in achieving something that the other groups might see as a distraction and an obstacle. It prevents them from collaborating rather than helping them to do it. The other problem with projects is they're like a song. You know, they have a beginning, they have a chorus, they have an end. They are by nature finite. Finite isn't going to help us here. We need a long, cohesive, sustained drive. By which I mean this needs a very long attention span. That is not typical in organizations, particularly not at senior level, where they often attack a particular strategy or a particular target. And we do something like a campaign or an initiative to achieve a thing. That's not only not going to get it where we need to go, it's actually counterproductive. We need everybody pulling together in one long, coherent, cohesive, sustained effort. And that requires a different type of circling of the wagons. We need people to talk to each other and collaborate with each other, and we don't generally create those conditions. I'll come on at the end to some things I think we can do about it quite quickly, but they won't be easy things because it's not natural for us to behave this way. So this all sounds great, doesn't it? This long, cohesive, sustained drive to do something that we don't even know what it is yet. This is why we need leadership here, not just management. Organizations have always been really good at managing things, which means to most of them, keeping things under control. achieving compliance, following and establishing rules, ensuring that people work efficiently. Those kinds of things are management things, and I'm not decrying them. We need those things. They're just not enough. We want to go somewhere. You know, management is inherently designed to keep things where they are. Leadership is about taking them somewhere else, and we need to go somewhere else, particularly to where we are right now. So this is going to take leadership. That will only happen, particularly in a long, cohesive, sustained way, if all of our people that are in those roles are actually leaders. You don't have to answer this, but imagine if you were to do a rough estimate, what percentage of your people in a management job would you say are genuinely leaders? If it's more than 60%, I'm coming to work for you, because it rarely is, in my experience. We have not valued that skill set enough in the last 30, 40 years. And we tend to promote people because they're dynamic or tough or driven or focused. They're people who can get things done, who knuckle people for underperforming, who can have the difficult conversations. And yeah, okay, those things are important, but they're not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ability to inspire and enthuse and engage and to have a vision and to bring everybody with you and to keep people together and on side and moving in a coherent direction. That's not the stuff that typically, as Belbin would call them, shapers, those kinds of really dynamic, driven, tough people. That's not what they do. Kevin often talks about the idea of the narcissism of small differences. This idea that quite often we promote people who have a lot of self-interest and like to achieve things because of the way it reflects on them. This is much more in the way that the army trains its officers at Sandhurst now, where I'm based, which is about servant leadership. This is about subsuming your own desires as a leader in order to do things, the right things for the greater good. That's often a very different mindset, a different skill set, and a different set of attitudes and values. Not to say you can't turn one into the other, but it's not easy. We need to start recognizing and valuing those leadership capabilities. Because we need our people to be enthused. They need a compelling vision of a better tomorrow. And that won't occur naturally. People have got to grab it and make that happen, to give people hope. And one of the primary responsibilities, I believe, of anybody in a leadership role is to give people hope. And let's face it, we could do with some of that just at the moment. So that compelling vision of a better tomorrow is only compelling because people believe it might be true. And telling people that everything's going to be all right by Christmas is not a compelling vision because people know it's not likely to be true. And we're currently telling people that schools are going to go back in March. Does that seem likely? Does it seem like a good idea? I'll leave you to be the judge of that. So a compelling vision has to be compelling because it's firstly a longer term one and it's about a better day. It's not just wishful thinking or some kind of panacea or something. It's actually, this is something we can achieve together. That takes some serious thinking, dialogue, input, co-creation. Moving on a bit then. This may seem like a miracle, but I might actually finish a bit early this time because I really would like to hear what people have got to say, but we'll see. And day and over, and my mouth isn't always connected to my brain. So, disconnected initiatives. This is something we are, I've mentioned it before, we are prone to, is we have people doing things. So, you know, one department will have a set of goals, another department will have a different set of goals. Do they go together? If they do, it's often by luck, because we think that through. I remember years ago doing some work with a household name company where they had, the board told me that they were planning on increasing their market share by 10% in the following year. So I asked them sort of obvious questions about what they were doing about that, and they told me about the marketing campaigns and about their pricing strategy. And so then I went to talk to people in their production facilities, and they were gearing up to increase production by 10%. I noted that that isn't exactly the same thing, but it was a start. And then I went and had a conversation with the people in logistics and warehousing. They didn't know anything about it. This is the challenge. You can't half do this. So had they have carried on with their plans to increase market share by 10%, where were they going to put everything? They didn't have the room for the stuff they'd already got. So you've got to think this through. Everybody's got to be part of this decision-making process so that they can all do what is necessary to be ready. I've said this before. I'll be very surprised if I don't say it again at least another 5 times today. Tribes do not help us, and yet they are our default position. We are absolutely in this together. I hope that one of the things that will happen out of this current situation and crisis is that we might have a think about how we value jobs. I think the idea that we should pay the chief executive of an organization 50 times as much as the average wage in that organization is frankly ludicrous and incredibly counterproductive, and I think probably immoral. We need to work out who creates value, who is actually in this together to create the value that we are trying to create. We are all in this together, and if we're not, we will not make it. There are lots of organizations around now, I hope you don't work for any of them, that won't be around by Christmas. Some because it's just their time. There are retail organizations who have, to some extent, outlived their usefulness. And that's brutal, and it's really bad for the people that work in those organizations. But they can't be resurrected because there is no place for them anymore. The smart ones can evolve fast enough to stay ahead of this particular tsunami. God, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you get what I mean, I'm sure. So we can't dish out things that we need to happen and say, right, your department, you do this, your department, you do that, and off it will all go, because it won't work like that. We've got to think it through coherently together. Together is a critical phrase here, again and again, together. It's not how we naturally do things. As a nation, generally speaking, we like hierarchy. We like chains of command. We like to retain control. We believe fundamentally that the higher up the organization you go, the smarter you are, even though we know that's not true. But we behave as if it is. So we've got to bring things together. The leadership team have got to come together, but they've also got to get stakeholder input. They've got to get input from all levels and all skill areas to understand what's happening and what is possible and what we're going to try and do. Just setting some financial targets is frankly naive and pretty unintelligent. So I can probably hear my colleague Carolyn going yay at this point, but with what we've just been through, I think we should always have done this, frankly, that the well-being and mental health of people should have been at the heart of everything we thought about anyway, but it sure as hell has to be now. Because if we don't take that into account, we will break people, we will lose people, we will fail. Now, for years, we've talked about skills and targets as being hard or soft. Hard targets are things to do with numbers, soft targets are often things to do with people. I've always thought that was ironic because actually the truth is the other way around. Any silly bugger can put a number on something. Anybody can set a target that says increase something by 5%. That's not hard, it's dead easy. Doing it, that's hard. But the soft stuff, as we call it, the people skills, the emotional intelligence areas, the things about bringing people together, the idea of uniting and inspiring people, those things we call soft are not soft. They're the hardest things we'll ever do. But they're the things we have to have in the beginning and the middle and the end. They're the center, the core of everything that we need to do. So we're going to think about how are we going to inspire our people to give of their best. In the work I've been doing, and my colleague Juliet's been doing too, and others, in the engagement task force for over a decade now. It seemed to me when we first came together in 2011 that actually what we were suggesting was common sense and obvious, that you needed to engage your people to get the best out of them. But still, the great majority of our organizations don't get it. Now, clearly, some of that's down to the way we've communicated because we just haven't clearly pressed the right buttons. We've got the messaging across, but still we're promoting people with a skill set that is no longer appropriate for where we're going next, I would say, in many cases. The ability to drive people hard to achieve things is not what we need right now, and it won't be what we need for the next 5 years. So we need to think about how we bring people together, inspire them and enable them to be the best they can be. So that requires empowerment, which in many ways is the opposite of what we've always had, which is control and regulation and compliance. We need to empower people, because you can't drive everything now from the top. It takes too long. And in any case, often those people are the most disconnected from the reality of what is required. So we've got to empower people to see what needs to be done, and we've got to enable them and give them the resources and authority to do what it takes. I'm often inspired by seeing some of the new organizations in various fields that have been formed in recent years in a very different way, where authority is devolved down to the lowest possible level, where people are enabled to make decisions because they think it's the right thing to do. And this isn't just in beanbag land. This happened to me. I was staying in a hotel back in the days when we were allowed to do that, and I had a problem with my room, and the person on the desk just decided to give me half my money back. And they were a person probably at the fairly lowest end of the pyramid for that organization, but they were empowered and authorized to just do what they thought was right for the customer. Now, that's risky for people at the top, because that's a loss of control. I wonder what the net effect is there. So we've got to empower people to see what needs to be done and to be able to do it. We've got to keep our stakeholders with us. Often I see in organizations, stakeholders being fed a line about what's going on. And that's not how you do this, and it's not how you create trust. For one thing, your stakeholders might often have some really useful input for you about what's going on out there, because they see things differently to you. It should not be an adversarial relationship. So all our stakeholders, we need to talk to them, whether that's employees or suppliers or regulators or customers or whoever it is. We need to talk to those people and get them together, because we are all in this together. And particularly this, you've got to have the skills in critical thinking, and they are not skills we teach, generally speaking. I was very much taught when I was at school that it was best not to think at all, because it just caused trouble. Whenever I asked difficult questions, I either got put in detention, hit, or sent to the headmaster's office. Eventually, I got expelled. So that wasn't very helpful to the school or to me. So it took me, it shaped my life, because I've gone a very different way round to achieve what I've achieved, because I couldn't do it the traditional way, because they took that option away from me. But critical thinking, the idea of questioning things and challenging things and starting again and unpicking things, is not a natural skill. Most people have had it trained out of them as children, as pupils. So we need to put it back in. Let's bring in the concept here that some of you may have heard of, the aggregation of marginal gains. Comes from here. It's in many ways a reasonably simple idea, but it plays against the way we naturally do things in most organizations. Dave's idea and the ideas of others, including my colleague John Steele, was part of this. What they did was about thinking that actually, if you can improve everything by a little bit, the aggregation of that is huge. And that's what they did. Now, if you can improve the brakes by 0.1%, if you can improve the way the saddle creates forward momentum by 0.1%, none of those things of itself seems particularly important, but you aggregate them, you accumulate them, you get a different story. And this is part of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this integrated thinking. Just doing something, taking an action, starting a project or an initiative, will not improve performance in a sustainable way. You might get a brief impact, like giving people some money. We know it has an impact, but for how long? So we wouldn't have achieved what we've achieved as a GB student my country is a GB. If we'd just done that one thing, if we just said, let's look at the tyres and analyse those, I bet we can improve that compound. That would have moved us up from 9th to 8th, probably. I'm old enough to remember a time, and some of you may be too, when I was very excited by the fact that there was a GB athlete in a final where we would come in bravely 7th. And we used to get the occasional freak who was amazingly talented, like a Sally Gunn or a Daley Thompson or a Steve Cram. You know, we used to get these people every now and again that would be spectacular. But if you look at where that's placed now, you know, 3rd on a medal table, more medals in Rio than we got even in London 2012. Yes, some of that's about lottery funding that's enabled people to train better, but a lot of it also is about we've recognised a far greater range of things that we want people to be good at. You know, we're dealing with nutrition, we're dealing with mental health, we're dealing with psychological stability. In some ways, you know, Steve Peters and his chimp paradox is part of all of this. There's so many things we've done to recognise what it is that creates sustained high performance. That's an element of what we're talking about here. It's not the biggest bit, but it's a bit. So we need to think about 1,000 things that we're going to try and improve, and we need to bring those things together. So here are things that I would say are key things that we need to be thinking about for this year. So for what it's worth, this is my magic bullets. I think one of the things that holds us back and makes our success less likely in recent years and certainly in future years is our attitude to managing performance. In so many organizations, we still have a negative attitude to it. We respond to underperformance rather than looking at the ways we can create high performance, like the Brailsford model. We're going into a new business model now. Things are going to work in a different way. Different types of business are going to be successful and they're going to operate differently. That's a different one. No, but it's not going to be true for everybody, but it's going to be true for the majority. So my number one thing, critical thinking, I've highlighted there, but it's actually the collective word that's really important too. We need to bring people together to think this stuff through at senior leader team level and at operational manager level. And those people need to gather input from others. So we need a collective sustained period of critical thinking. We need to get together and think about what's going to be different. How are we going to respond to that? And what therefore do we need to be and to create in order to thrive in that new world? That's not the same thing as setting some new targets, hoping to God that everything goes okay and trousering the cash. That's not what we're talking about here. So collective critical thinking means bringing people together, and not once, like 50 times, where they can really unpick this and get down to the detail, really think about what this is all about, really gather proper intelligence from the outside world about what's happening, about what's going to happen, about the direction of travel. Start really thinking about, in that case then, what sort of organization do we need to become? And that means you've got to start again to some extent, at least on paper. You've got to imagine starting again. If we were starting today for this new market, how would we work? How would we look? Would it be anything like this that it is now? Chances are no, because that was designed for a time that no longer is going to exist. So collective critical thinking is key here. What's even bigger than that is the idea of collective and shared responsibilities, something that very few organizations, in my experience, have ever been successful in doing, having a shared set of responsibilities. Now, I'm often called in to work with leadership teams and management teams, and it's a courtesy title. They're very rarely a team. They're a council of war of tribal chiefs. Their loyalties lie outside that room to whichever team they see themselves as the leader of. And so you'll get people in there, you know, the finance director will be dealing with the money, the marketing director will be dealing with the market, the operations director will be thinking about operational things. That's not how this works. You have to check the job title at the door. You are a strategic decision-making unit collectively. You've got to think about the greater good. What's the right thing for us all to be doing together? Then we can devolve and deploy everybody else to make that stuff happen. So collective and shared responsibility. So that brings me on to the third point, which is that we've got to have integrated and shared goals and targets. Again, something we've never done. is setting a person or a team a target has a number of outcomes. Do we want them all? What we need here is for people to be required to collaborate and support each other to achieve the big goal that we really want, which is thriving and prosperity, survival in the first instance. So these three things are, for me, are the critical three things that I'd like to leave you with today to think about. Can we bring all of our various key people together, whether they're in leadership roles or not, actually, but certainly at senior level and operational manager level, can we bring those people together to think about what is it that we need to do? Where are we? What's going on? What's going to happen? What are our stakeholders needing? What are they going to need? How's their world going to change? And start thinking about that stuff. The danger is, of course, that you end up with information paralysis because you've got so much information, but that's a chance you're going to have to take. You've got to have the smarts to be able to work out which is the things, which set of things are the things you really need to think about the most. There's always a priority order in these things. So whose needs do we have to meet? What does that say about the way we need to operate, and how therefore do we need to be to make that happen? That's got to be thought through. Then we've got to think about what is it that we want people collectively in teams or levels to have a shared responsibility for. Let's not divide and conquer with individual targets. We've already proved for many years that doesn't really work very well. It can work in isolated areas, but we wouldn't have won all those medals if it had just been about saying to each athlete or sports person, you've got to achieve this. There has to be a degree of strategic, critical, integrated thinking behind it. Then we can do that. Then we can give them their goals. But we're doing that in a certain knowledge of what's actually going to be the best thing for everyone. So these are the three things that I would encourage you to think through after today. How are you going to do that? We need a new way of viewing and managing performance, and a new model for our businesses going forward. In truth, it's this that was behind the creation of Inspiration All when Kevin first had the idea and started talking to me and a couple of others about it. That the whole marketplace is geared towards specialization. And that's all very well, but that encourages people to get better and better at one thing, probably at the expense of several others. So what we've done is assembled a multidisciplinary group of people who are leaders in their thought leaders in their field, to try and bring that stuff together. Think about, you can't just get better at A, you've got to get better at B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and up to Z times 5 as well. How do those things interrelate? How do you integrate those things in such a way that you can achieve the greater good? So I hope that's given you some things to think about. And I hope you do actually think about them. And particularly, I hope you go away and think some more about them, because this isn't stuff that you can fix. Don't wave a wand at this. This isn't Gryffindor. You've got to think this through. So the big question is, now what? How do you influence this? How do you shape it? How do you make it better? How do you bring people together and start getting that thinking shared? So I'm going to stop sharing now then and see if there's questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Nigel. And I just invite everybody from your end of your muted microphones to give Nigel a big round of applause, and to say thank you for, I don't know, certainly setting lots of rusty cogs spinning in my brain, and an absolutely fantastic Nigel. So just while waiting for some more of the questions to come in, so for our attendees, just a reminder, there is that Q&A button down the bottom, or please do feel free to use the chat to post some questions to Michael. Juliet, I'm going to come to you first, just to see, you know, from your perspective, what's kind of resonated in what Nigel's just said. Do you agree with all of it, or are there any bits that you'd like to push back on?
Oh gosh, I'd love to disagree with some stuff just to be controversial and, you know, to make it more exciting. But I have to say, I always find Nigel really inspiring, and he has a brilliant way of expressing concepts. So now what I've learned is how to better express things that I wholeheartedly agree with him about. I think a couple of things that I think are particularly important about what Nigel said is that, you know, the current situation with the pandemic and the pressure it's putting on organizations and leaders means that, you know, it's really exposing a lack of leadership compared with management in organizations. and it's leading to all kinds of dysfunctional behaviors like monitoring software and this, that and the other, because as Nigel says, performance management is so immature. And not just that, but leadership is lacking in the sense that people haven't been given autonomy. So leaders are struggling to know, or sorry, managers in leadership roles are struggling to know what to do. And yes, that's my big takeaway, is that every organization really needs to pay attention to what Nigel's been talking about and really do something about it.
Nigel, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, that's my comment about that. Yes, all of that. Yeah, and you're right, there's a lot of forces that have been acting against it. Whether it's the fact that we tend to promote to very senior levels from a relatively narrow seam of social background, or of ethnicity, or of gender, or of thinking style, or of any of those kinds of things, that we need proper inclusion and diversity in order to make this work. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Nigel, and brilliant comment there, Juliet. I know that Carolyn wants to jump in on the action as well. She will come off mute in a second. I know she will, because we've got to the end of January and no one's ever said you've got your mute button on.
I think that's the first time I've ever done that, but there we go. So I shall repeat myself. Thank you, Nigel, once again for an inspiring talk there. And a lot of what you said, yes, resonates with the work that I'm currently doing on wellbeing and culture of care. And I think what Juliet was just saying as well is relevant, in the sense that we know that with wellbeing and in trying to instill a culture of care, leadership's key. And what's happening as a result of the pandemic is that actually the whole wellbeing emphasis is shifting away from the proactive looking at what organisations need to be doing to improve wellbeing and mental health, and it's gone right back to where it was before, which is all the tertiary interventions, where all organisations are looking at doing is resilience building. So almost every organisation that I'm hearing about at the moment is saying, well, we want to provide wellbeing training or resilience training, or managing mental health conversations training, loads of, there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but it's not really hitting the mark, because if we're going to hit the mark, then we need to start looking at how managers are leading teams remotely. And when I'm doing some of the online work with teams at the moment, it's very clear we end up almost doing sort of wellbeing survey, culture survey while we're talking, because they're talking about what all their issues are. And often the things we're trying to teach them in terms of resilience building and coping strategies isn't what they need. Actually, what they need is somebody to listen to the issues and problems that are causing them stress in the first place. And often it is their leaders or managers leading poorly. So monitoring them to check what time they're starting work in the morning and sending emails at night, and just tons of stuff that actually is really easy for us to deal with and get to grips with if we go back to the basics and start to say, right, okay, let's look at what our leaders are doing and our managers are doing.
Thanks for that, Carolyn. Nigel, do you want to comment on that? And then we've got a great question that's come in from the Q&A. So Nigel, just to remind you, I will ask you them verbally so that everybody else can hear what the fantastic questions are.
Consider myself duly slapped. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's interesting. I think a lot of this behaviour comes from people looking over their shoulders. Quite often you see managers, leaders doing those kinds of behaviours because they know someone's watching to see if they do, because that's expected of them. And if they don't do that, they're a bit soft. And the last thing we want any of our managers and leaders to be is soft, because then they might achieve stuff. We don't want any of that. So this idea of making sure you're keeping people's nose to the grindstone and keeping them working. Never mind whether they're doing anything useful, or if they feel like carrying on or leaving or dying or whatever, being off sick. So I think, yeah, you're right, that behaviour stems from a misunderstanding of what leadership looks like, that we think it's about knuckling people, and secondly, the kind of fear of being criticised from above if you don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Nigel, do you think that we should be allowed, almost the way that I've posed that question gives something away. Should we be allowed to say, I don't know what the answer is or which way to go?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we have no choice, because none of us have got a clue. I certainly don't. I mean, I've suggested some ideas, but it's going to be a very localized decision-making process, because it depends on your context and your influencing factors and stakeholders. So I think it's perfectly reasonable that we should start from the premise that we don't actually know the answer. Let's work it out. I guess that would be my preferred position. If we think we can do it, then we're probably falling foul of the Drucker thing of trying to act with yesterday's logic by saying, yeah, we know the answer, you just do this and this. Yeah. I've always thought that anyone who starts an expression with, well, you just, or can you just, should be killed. I think it's just a firm but fair. I think that's what.
Just changing tact ever so slightly with regards to that particular comment, and coming to the fabulous question that came in on the Q&A just now, which is from an anonymous attendee. So thank you very much for that. So the anonymous attendee asks, well, really great and inspirational ideas for the future of leadership in organizations. Integration of goals is an excellent concept. Does that have to begin with the board level? Often boards have the challenge to integrate. How then does that even begin to manifest down the organization?
Yeah, that's a hell of a question, isn't it? I wish I had a hell of an answer. It's, I suppose, first I'd say it doesn't necessarily have to start from the top. I think it'll have to end up back there again, because things need to be brought together, and probably only people at the very top end can really do that. Although it'd be great if it wasn't them, actually, in many ways. I'd love to see that happen in the middle. I just don't think it will. People don't feel like they have the freedom or authority to make those kinds of big choices in the middle in most organizations that they should. So I think you can start thinking this through at a local level, right down at the sharp end. You just need to share it and collaborate. Because wherever you start, you need ultimately to be talking to everybody. And that's, I think, because that's so hard, it's too daunting, and lots of people don't like the idea. And also, going back to Carolyn's point about, and the same thing Jules said about people watching other people see whether they're working or not, and that kind of stuff, that doesn't encourage sharing. It encourages secrecy and covering your notes so that people don't cheat in an exam. It's those kinds of behaviours that we've always thought of collaboration as cheating. You're supposed to come up with these ideas on your own. You're just sharing things.
Can I just back that up, Sarah, very quickly on Nigel's point then? I've been working for the last month with a company on leadership all the way through the organisation. Interesting enough, the directors and SLT have stepped away from this, but they're ticking a box with all the other training with the rest of the company. And it's 1,200 people in the company. And to back Nigel's point up there, you can actually start at any level, because I think we need leadership at every level, whether you're leading 2 people as a manager or 10 people, you should be inspiring them. So it's the leadership you should be doing, not the managing. And what we're finding is that actually the managers of those teams are turning into leaders, and they've seen the impact that that has in their teams. So the culture in those teams is actually improving anyway. So bug at the top of the tree, we're going to make it a better place to be anyway. And there's nothing wrong with starting that. When these guys do come through and kick out the old farts at the top, then what a place that will be. But they've seen how that will work. And I think that's the important thing, is how they feel and how their people feel. So I think that's a brilliant point. I just absolutely can start anywhere. It'll be tough, absolutely tough, but it can be done.
I would just like to point out that, Kevin, that you and I are both some of the old farts at the top, so be careful what you wish for. But
yeah, good point. Well put.
Just building on that as well. So I mean, I think sometimes when you're in an organization, and if you're lucky enough to get promoted at different points in time, the kind of the almost the expectation, or your kind of your personal expectation on how your behavior should change, including how you dress and all of that kind of stuff, is quite interesting as it goes up through that organization. Do you think those sort of that kind of weird culture of this is what I'm supposed to look like and how I'm supposed to act when I reach certain levels, do you think that sometimes acts against this sort of bottom-up collaboration that we can sometimes learn when we're deeper in those organizations?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it sort of plays to the whole idea that a lot of people in management roles role play being what they think one is supposed to be. Yeah, they've kind of seen it happening over many years of being managed and led themselves, and so they adopt that style when they go in there because that's what they think you're supposed to do. It takes a fair amount of self-confidence and courage to decide you're going to do something different, particularly if the culture is one of conformity and compliance, as it often is in organizations. So yeah, I think you're right. There's a degree of bringing people together in order to create some kind of a cabal necessary. Could be at the bottom or in the middle, but you need that degree of confidence that comes from the wisdom of crowds, of actually supporting each other and giving each other a bit more backbone to do this stuff. Because I think there's people at the top have a lot to lose. For one thing, I mean, I heard this said in a boardroom not that long ago, many months ago, from somebody, when a really great idea had come up from further down the organisation. The chief exec turned to the person who was the leader of that strand of the organisation, saying, "What do I pay you for then?" And that's kind of, you guarantee now there's no idea is ever going to get through from now on. Ever is going to make it up to the top, because the immediate response was, "Well, you get paid the most. Why didn't you think of that?" There's a lot of that fear.
I
Yeah.
think there's a huge vein there, Nigel, that's untapped by a lot of people. A lot of people talk about empowerment, don't they? We talked about it today, and they'll say, "Oh, we empowered people, didn't work." But the reason why we should empower people is they're making decisions, or can make decisions, based on information, because they're doing the bloody job, not instruction. And again, I think that's the difference between leadership management. They've been told what to do, so those guys will go and do it. But if they can make decisions based on information, wow, would that be powerful?
Yeah, and I think empowerment in the eyes of a lot of people in very senior positions equates to risk. The more you empower people, the greater the risk. And that's probably true, but it's probably not as great a risk as not doing it.
Yeah.
But they know what the risk of doing it is. They don't know what the risk of not doing it often is, because they haven't tried to work that out. I was taught by my grandfather many things, personally, one of which was how to have a very sore ass, because he used to kick me up the ass regularly. But one of the things he used to say to me was that every problem has two prices. There's the price for fixing it and the price for not fixing it. The smart thing is to work out which is which. And that has stayed with me for 50 odd years as an essential truth. If you do something about it, that has a price. But if you don't do something about it, that has a price too. Which one do you want to pay?
Yeah. Just with this, Nigel, and almost kind of stepping a little bit back in our conversation just now, there's a question that came in, and the man knows exactly who he is who asked it. So collective critical thinking or groupthink, is there an issue if you have a narcissistic director or senior leadership team involved, so it might not work?
Yes, clearly. That it does a lot. This does revolve around intent, the purity of intent. If somebody wants to pretend to do this in order to make themselves look good, that's a chance you have to take. Frankly, I would judge the organisation for being stupid enough to promote somebody like that into a senior position. However, if it's done, it's done. We all do that. Countries elect strange people into leadership roles, don't they? So, it's always a chance we take. I would say, though, that we have to hold each other to account. This isn't about power in the kind of hierarchical sense. It's about actual power, which is about the ability to influence. I've often thought that one of the reasons that some tyrannical regimes in countries are so violent in response to things is the fear of what happens if they really lose control. The barbarians will be through the gates with keys and armed. And I think a lot of senior leaders feel like that too, because a lot of them have no idea what really goes on at the sharp end. They don't know what people actually do or why they do it. And they don't, I find this working with government, they have no real idea about the lives of the people that they're supposedly leading. So they don't know what the reality is of most of what they do. They're just guessing and being advised, usually by people who weren't elected.
So do you think then a kind of a core characteristic of a leader should be that inquisitiveness and that curiosity and that empathy for other people, not only in the room around that boardroom table, but then throughout the organization and those different stakeholders?
Absolutely. And that's part of that soft thing, isn't it? That those are emotional intelligence things and compassion things and caring things that we've tended to engineer out of our senior leadership in organizations, because those people don't get selected to get to the last 2 or 3 layers because they're seen as soft. They let people off the hook, they let them get away with things. Yeah. I was told that when in one of my early jobs as a manager, that if you start asking people what they want, where will it end? I thought, well, it might end with them actually wanting to do the job properly. That would be a good place for it to end, but that wasn't acceptable.
Just with this, Nigel, so David, who's one of the attendees, has posted in chat, may I recommend ISO 55000 as a structured way of achieving some of what we've been talking about. If you've got 8 minutes, visit a video on the big picture, and so please do go to that link that's posted within the chat. He then follows it up with, I was hoping to disagree with Nigel having read the description, but I agree and support his whole approach. Thank you, Nigel.
Bless you, David. Thank you. Yeah, all I would the slight qualification I would add is that I think he's right. That, that there are certain initiatives and standards that can help us know how to start addressing some of this stuff. I'd say, ISO 9000 and IIP are probably in that mix too, as things that are helpful. And the European Excellence Model is a good thing to think about. They're all good frameworks for us to think about it, but it's so important that they are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. And some of the things I was saying earlier, the trouble is I think often they become self-fulfilling. They're just things that we do in order to go, look, we've got that badge on our letterhead. They've got to be done in order to do this other stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. We've got one final question before I then pass back to Kevin to remind us of what is happening in a month's time and any other bits and pieces for us to remember. And this question comes from Paul Pritchard, who we all know well. And he says, to what extent can external or existential crises, e.g. pandemics, climate change, etc., serve to support the leadership challenges that Nigel is describing?
Yeah, cheers for that as the last question, Paul. Thanks. Well, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, in Paul's world of sustainability, that we've managed to ignore most of the peril of climate change as if it's irrelevant to most of what organisations do. They've managed to pretend it isn't true. And of course, they weren't able to do that with COVID because it was so visceral and so immediate, they couldn't duck it. So I think those things probably do help in that they create an imperative. But it still requires people to be smart enough to bring it into their thinking as part of all of this. But I think now, with where we are and where we're going next for the next year or two, it's got to be, both of those things have got to be part of our thinking in order to decide where we need to be and what we need to be.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nigel. So with that, before I pass back to Kevin, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together yet again for the wonderful Nigel Girling. Thank you very much, Nigel. It was brilliant.